Hello and welcome to another episode of Exploring Standards. As always, I am your host, Jess, and today I am joined on the podcast by Derek Geyer from DHG Quality Consultants. Derek, how are you today?
I'm very good. And yourself?
I'm very well, thank you. Today on the podcast, we are talking about BS 99001, which is the quality in built environment standard. So before we kind of go into more questions, Derek, can you give our listeners a bit of overview? So what is BS 99001 and how does it fit within the wider landscape of quality standards in construction?
So, BS 99001 is basically quality management specifically for construction for the built environment. Most people know ISO 9001, but that's a very generic standard. It's across all industries. But the good thing about 9001 is it's broad, but it doesn't really speak the language of construction. BS 99001 steps in and literally says, okay, right, construction, you're a messy profession. There's lots of interfaces. There's temporary teams which change quite frequently. And there's long supply chains with regulatory pressures as well. So let's create a standard that actually reflects what that means in reality. So instead of trying to force construction into a generic framework, BS 99001 gives the industry a tailored practical structure for managing quality from design through to handover. It sits alongside 9001, but it's more specific, much more relevant, and honestly, much more useful in a day to day project delivery.
That's really interesting. It's much more useful in the day-to-day project, isn't it? Because sometimes these standards kind of come along and it just almost seems like a stamp, don't they? But to be able to use it day to day is brilliant. So then what type of construction companies need it? And also how does it fit into tendering processes?
So, what kind of construction companies need it or will need it in the future? Every single one will need it, and it's I know it's currently sitting going through the UCAS approval process at present, but eventually this will be the new gold standard for quality in construction. So, who could benefit from it? Main contractors, specialist contractors, design consultants, and even clients who want better assurance. And where it really matters in tendering is that clients are getting more and more demanding about quality, evidence, and risk management. So they just don't want organizations who have got, we're certified to 9001 anymore. They're looking for organizations that actually know how to control quality on a live project. BS 99001 gives companies a way to demonstrate that they're not just ticking boxes. And to a certain extent, a lot of organizations holds certificates for 9001. However, because it is a very generic standard, it's difficult sometimes to actually be able to demonstrate compliance to the construction requirements on that type of standard. So, yeah, most organizations have a construction specific system. They understand the interfaces, they manage inspections properly, but can they provide real assurance that they're actually doing that? So within PQQs, so pre-qualification questionnaires and tenders, it will become a differentiator for organisations. If two companies look similar, one has 9001, the other one has 9001, but then one of them has 99001. The one with 99001 will be more mature, they will be more predictable, they will have better levels of control, and ultimately they'll be able to control risk and provide that to the customers at the end of the day.
I love that. And putting yourself ahead of your competitors, which obviously is what you want in the tendering process, isn't it? Otherwise, it can be quite hard out there. So, what problem was BS 99001 designed to solve?
The problem it was designed to solve. So the big problem in construction is quality is inconsistent. Not because people don't care. Nobody gets up in the morning and turns up on a construction site thinking I'm going to do the wrong thing today. That never happens. But because the systems they're using weren't really designed for construction, so ISO 9001 is great for stable environments where things don't change. So, manufacturing process or manufacturing organizations, sorry, companies that deliver these rather than hard construction. Construction's the complete opposite because every project will potentially have new teams that get together. So they've got different interfaces. They've got that learning of, who knows what, where's the skills gap, where's the competence gap. Different subcontractors working on different projects, and again, working for different organizations. Changing designs or incomplete designs, which can be a real headache in construction if they're not managed correctly. Tight deadlines, lots of regulation. There's lots of interfaces between design teams, consultants, contractors, clients, supply chain, and lots of opportunities for things to go wrong. So BS 99001 was created to solve the gap between generic quality and construction reality. And I think that's where it does it really, really well. It gives the industry a framework that actually matches how projects work. And yeah, it's not an extra over. It's actually something that's designed to be bespoke for our industry.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. You said this industry is so dynamic and there's so many moving parts, and having a standard that kind of brings it all together makes so much sense, doesn't it? So then, where were the biggest gaps or weaknesses in traditional quality management systems, such as ISO 9001, when applied to construction projects?
For me, there's probably about 4 or 5 big ones. So temporary teams, what tends to happen in construction is we know the high level management team of a project pretty early. However, because people are finishing off jobs and they're maybe not actually put onto a job until a bit later, yeah, we don't ultimately know who the team are going to be. So ISO assumes kind of stable processes and stable teams. Construction doesn't have that, as teams change continually. Interfaces as well, trades overlap, designs change, and coordination is everything. When you actually pick apart ISO 9001, it doesn't really go into that sort of level of detail. Evidence as well, yes, that there's clauses within 9001 that talk about verification and validation, but construction needs inspection, test records, photographs, sign offs, traceability. ISO doesn't define any of that, where BS 99001 does. Again, risk. ISO is a bit generic when it comes to dealing with risks. Yes, strategic risks and business risks and risk based thinking are all part of that. However, construction risk is dynamic and project specific. There's more clauses within 99001 that deal specifically with the project rather than the organisation. And supply chain, probably the biggest one and should have been number one, but I'll wrap it up at the end. Subcontractors deliver the majority of work. A lot of organizations are management organizations, but ISO doesn't give much guidance on controlling them. True, there's section 8.4, which is control of externally provided processes, products, and services. But construction supply chains are so far more complex than that. It's not just about similar supply chains doing the same, because they all have interrelating processes that are different from other ones. So companies end up with ISO systems that look good on paper, but they don't actually help them to manage quality on site. BS 99001 closes the gap on that.
I mean, I feel like you've outlined plenty of gaps there of 9001. And obviously, you said it's not a bad system, it just doesn't go into enough depth for the likes of construction. So, why does the built environment need its own tailored approach to quality rather than relying on general industry standards?
Um, I think I've been working in construction for 30 years. I've had experience, being on site, being in the office, project management. Um, and then within the last sort of 10, 11 years focusing on quality. I guess construction's like no other industry. You're not making the same product day in, day out. You're building something unique, with a unique team in a unique environment every time, unless you work in traditional house building where you are making maybe 5 or 6 homes that are basically agreed and there's blueprints for them. No construction project's the same. So the built environment has higher safety risks just because of the nature of what we do, higher regulatory pressure, even more so coming now through the Building Safety Act. Complex designs. Yes, buildings aren't just square boxes. They've got to look good as well, but on top of that, they've got to be functional, last the test of time for what they're designed to do. We have multiple contractors, all ranging in different skills, experience, and competency. The supply chain are very long. So when we think about supply chain, it's not just about, your tier one contractors. It's not about, you know, your first tier supply chain that sit off that. There can be, multiple suppliers providing that. And I guess for me, the further you get away from the source of that, the less control there could potentially be. Public scrutiny, construction's always, under the eye of the public, whether that be it the press or the public in general. And quality failures do get highlighted quite, significantly and quite frequently. One recently where there's a building built that potentially needs to get knocked down now. So that's no great for construction. And very expensive consequences when things go wrong. So a tailored approach isn't a luxury, it's essential. And
Mhm.
BS 99001 recognises that we need structure, clarity, and consistency, but delivering that in a way that fits real world projects and something that allows us to adapt that to each and every unique bespoke project as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, mistakes are just expensive because they are obviously in quality, but they also could be fatal. And projects are different every time. And there's not a lot of consistency in the work that there is there. So it makes sense that having a general standard isn't going to work, but having one that is tailored to the industry. So then what are the key principles or requirements that make BS 99001 different from standard ISO based quality management?
A few standout differences: project specific quality planning. It's not just a generic quality manual. Planning, as we well know from 9001, makes up the biggest part of the standard. Same goes for 99001. But for 99001, it's actually looking at the planning for the project. What do we intend to get? What do we intend to do? How many inspection test plans do we need? What are the specific quality requirements we need to work to? All those need to be understood and defined before you actually start to deliver the job. So at the planning stage, that's super important. We need clear definitions of roles and responsibilities for team members, for organisations as well, especially around who's inspecting works and who's signing off works. That's really important that we actually take time to stop, and that will be highlighted within documentation. If there's any hold points, we need to stop and get sign off and clarity on it. Interface management, so making sure trades don't clash, gaps don't appear, and there's handshakes at each stage. Yes, we have BIM models where we do clash detection and things like that, but it's really about the the personal side of interface management, making sure that trades are walking out on site and looking at the activities, and evidence and traceability as well. Proper records, proper checks, lots of photographs, and proper assurance. I say to people all the time who work in construction, think of a construction project as if you're on holiday. You'll take hundreds of snaps when you go on holiday. Do the same when you're on a construction site. It won't do any harm to have that evidence. And at the end of the day, if something did happen in the future, you've always got the photograph of, that time to go back and check on. Risk-based quality control, so focus and effort on the things that are most likely to go wrong. And that's probably just through the planning stage, is to
Mhm.
identify the key risks on the project and make sure that we have mitigations in place for them. And probably one of the things that all organizations should be learning from is learning loops, or making sure that we're capturing lessons learned and actually preventing repeat issues, or making sure that if we've done something right, we do it again because we know it's going to get a good successful outcome on. What makes it different? It's basically 9001 with the construction bits added in, but the bits that everybody potentially have been trying to improvise in the past, because there's no standard that actually dictated or explained what you should actually be doing.
You mentioned in there about sort of learning from your mistakes, and I did an episode with someone, and they were talking about, when I go somewhere and they haven't got any incidents reported at all, I run for the hills because they're obviously not being truthful to themselves. I'm sure it's very very common and the same sort of in this standard as well, because you need to learn from mistakes and recording those down and then learning from them. And that's what you need to be doing.
Touching on that one, actually,
Mhm.
a lot of people think mistakes are bad. Mistakes are bad if you keep making the same mistakes, but mistakes are good if you can identify what went wrong and what you need to do to basically prevent them from happening. Mistakes are good because you know you can really learn from them.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree more. Same mistake repeated, that is a mistake. Same mistake learned is amazing. So you mentioned this earlier, the roles that people play. So what role does collaboration across contractors, consultants, and suppliers play in the standard?
The role it plays is huge. Quality falls apart on projects when people work in silos, and I have actually seen it get a lot better. You know, people are working a lot closer together. But what 99,001 does on top of that is it pushes organizations to share information early, you know, whether that's at the initial design stage or potentially problems. If you share it early, then you get a chance to eliminate it and make it right. Coordinate inspections. So as I touched on before, within inspection and test plans for work packages, it should say, you know, we need to check this item and you know, this organization is down to do it. So, you know, making sure that that's coordinated and making sure there's actually people who are accountable and responsible for that is important. The management interfaces between trades is important as well, to make sure that people are aware of what they are accountable for and what they are responsible for when. So linking that back to the programmed activities. For collaboration, making sure that, you know, design is communicated and change management is properly managed. You know, we never start off a construction project and get to the end without any change or without any revision to drawings or specifications. That just doesn't happen. So change management is huge, and communicating the change out to everybody's is big. And if you're using a common data environment that everybody's got access to, that should be pretty easy to do. But it's just to make sure that all changes are properly communicated. I guess involving suppliers at the planning stage and not just at delivery
Mm.
is important, because they can actually influence quite a lot of the finalized installation and design methodologies, because ultimately they are the specialists at the end of the day. And for collaboration, agree at the start, benchmarks, agree, you know, first of a kinds, you know, make sure everybody understands what good looks like, and what is actually expected on the project. And for collaboration, it's not just about one company having a great system, it's about the whole project working together. You know, you may find that somebody has a stronger quality management system, maybe potentially somebody's just a bit weaker on it. To not bring everybody along in the journey is quite a big failing. And I guess as well, if the architect, the main contractor, and subcontractors aren't aligned, quality becomes a bit of a lottery.
Mm.
You know, and ultimately it's okay, you know, we'll hope that that goes right. 99,001 provides certainty to everyone.
Which is what you want, isn't it, on a building site? And in this environment, you need certainty, you need clarity, and you need these high standards. What practical improvements do organizations typically see when they implement BS 99001 properly?
So the improvements, where you would see improvements in 9001, they would be around organizational improvements and potentially process improvements as well. When organizations, and I know there's only currently a few that have actually went through the sort of pilot scheme just now because it's not UCAS accredited, but when organizations will, you know, implement 99001, they will see fewer defects because there's better control. There will be less rework. Less rework means safer sites as well, because people are doing things right first time. Better coordination between trades, because individuals and organizations will know when it's their turn to do something and when it's their turn to stop and let somebody else do that. There will be a lot less ambiguity around inspections and test processes, because they will all be written down and agreed right at the start. So it's not going to leave that to chance at the end of the day. There'll be more predictable project outcomes. So if we think of, if we think of what a process is, it's inputs, it's interrelated activities and then outputs. If we know what we want to achieve right at the start, we know what tools, systems and processes we're going to use, the outputs are going to be the correct outputs as well. Definitely a stronger reputation for intenders. You will see now that a lot of organizations are actually asking for evidence of compliance to BS 99001. I know that, construction line, that's a question that they're going to be asking going forward. It's not, do you have a certified quality management system to 9001? The first question will be is, do you have certification to 99001? And then if you don't, you need to then provide evidence as to all the criteria. And I think as well, it will provide more confident handovers. So handovers shouldn't be a surprise. Handover should literally just be handing over what we've been asked to build. It will take away any sort of uncertainty there, because it will be a lot more defined and clear as to what will happen. And honestly, one of the biggest wins will be clarity. People knowing what they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to do it, and how it gets checked and what evidence is going to be supplied on the back of it. I think it's just a bit of a no-brainer, actually.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, when we talk about those practical improvements, that huge the list was huge, wasn't it? So moves beyond just having that stamp for say tenders, which obviously it does help with, because you said yourself, if you haven't got this standard, then you have to prove this evidence anyway. So you're actually giving yourself more work. But then
Yep.
on the flip side of that as well, there's a lot of improvements kind of in day to day. So obviously we've talked about that this standard is just being UCAS approved currently, but are there any common misconceptions or challenges when businesses first adopted the standard?
Yeah, I mean, there's been about, I think there's about 3 or 4 large organisations who have actually got certified to the standard just now. With all new standards when they come out, there will always be misconceptions around it. I think one of the ones would be it's just ISO 9000 with a new badge. No, it's much more specific than that, and much more practical as well. When I first got hold of the standard and started to look through it, cost is never mentioned once in 9000. It's mentioned in 99,000. The word project is never mentioned once in 9000. I think, and don't quote me on this, but I think it's between 60 or 70 references to the word project within BS 99001. So it's actually tailored to the project shall, and obviously evidence to control that as well. A lot of people think taking on a new standard, there'll be lots more paperwork to do. Actually, organizations will be able to reduce the amount of paperwork that they produce, because 99001 focuses on the stuff that matters, the critical stuff, not all the fluffy, woolly things in the background that you think if you tell somebody that they obviously know what they're talking about. It's based on fact. It's only for big contractors. That's not true. This will be required for all organisations, and whether that is to be held at an organisational level, or whether it's just going to be project by project, but it's not just for big contractors. It will be for even smaller SMEs to prove that they've got competence to this standard as well. Again, common misconception with most standards is it's too complicated. There's too much involved with it. Personally, from going through a gap analysis with an organisation that had 9001 and looking at what was required for 99001, we were actually doing quite a lot of the things in the background anyway. It
Mm.
was just about maybe tweaking it, or just making it a bit more visible actually as to why we're doing it, or communicating that with the project teams as well. So once you actually get your head in around 99001, it's not difficult, it's not complicated, it's not unwieldy, there's not a lot more to do. If you're doing it already, you will be okay. If you're not doing good construction quality management just now, yes, you will need to change. Yes, you will need to make some updates. And I think a lot of organisations will potentially say, yeah, we're doing this already. Why do we need another standard on top of 9001? Some do, but not consistently across the board, and maybe not on all projects, and not with the level of assurance that 99,001 actually expects and will bring.
I mean, fantastic list there. So thank you so much. As you said, quality across the board is a big thing. As you said, a gap analysis normally points out that you're doing a lot of things anyway. It just needs a few things to solidify it. Love that. Thank you very much, Derek, for joining me on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Before we go, have you got any final thoughts you'd like to share with our guests?
Yeah, just as a kind of summary of the chat, and thanks Jess and Ascent for having me today. Yeah, at the end of the day, 99,001 is good for construction because it will finally give us a framework that matches the reality of how projects are actually delivered. Projects aren't delivered in a nice, clean office environment where we've got a lot of thinking time and plenty of resource. People are up against it, end of it all the time. So if you can strip back on what you need and deliver on the basic requirements in 99,001, it definitely will bring benefits. What it also does is it will bring clarity to where previously things were a bit vague. It will bring consistency where things were maybe just a bit patchy, and it will also provide proper assurance to clients who are often relying on hope rather than evidence. We need to get away from that. Yeah, okay, let's hope that everything will be okay. We're better than that as a construction industry. So once it becomes UCAS accredited, getting certified won't just be a badge, it'll be a signal that a company genuinely understands how to manage quality in a modern construction environment. And it'll also show clients, it'll show interested parties, stakeholders as well, that you're actually serious about reducing defects, improving coordination, strengthening governance, and delivering predictable outcomes. That link back to sustainability, where you're not having defects, you're not having to go back to site twice, you're not having to throw materials in the skip to then restart again. And honestly, if construction, wants to raise the bar, rebuild trust, and move away from the rework culture that's plagued itself over the years, BS 99001 is the most practical way that we can do this. That's why I think every organisation should be looking at it, not because they have to, because it genuinely will make the work better for everybody.
I mean, isn't that what you want at the end of the day for a company, for an
Ab-
organization? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Derek, so much for joining me on the show today. It has been an absolute pleasure. I think this episode has been fantastic, and I can't wait to see kind of more about BS 99001 and kind of how it grows within the industry. Thank you for those who've been listening to the episode. If you have enjoyed it, please make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. What I will do is I will pop Derek's contact details into the show description. So if you'd like to reach out to Derek, if you've got any more questions, or if you want to continue the conversation further, I'm sure Derek will welcome the conversation. Thank you for listening today, and I'll be back with another episode in a couple of weeks.